Okay, so my name is Tiffany Seaman, and I am one of the admins of the Kansas Science of Reading group, along with my two beautiful admins, Gina and Renee, who are both coaches, supporters in literacy in the Wichita Public Schools. So we are so excited to have our guest speaker tonight, and I will give a brief introduction. All right, so Mr. Peine has served as a teacher, instructional coach, building administrator, director of special education, and assistant superintendent. He has worked as a district leader in both rural and urban districts and is currently serving as the executive director of student support services for Wichita Public Schools. Mr. Peine is dedicated to ensuring all students succeed and is experienced in the design and implementation of systems that support the success of students, teachers, and leaders. In addition to his work in public schools, Mr. Peine is an educational consultant and also serves as an adjunct instructor for a local university, teaching graduate courses in the areas of instruction, assessment, and classroom management. He is the current president of the Kansas Association of Special Education Administrators and chair of the Professional Development Committee of the Council of Administrators of Special Education. You have many, many roles. How exciting. We are so excited to have you tonight and to hear about this special topic that you're going to share with us. I think it's on many of our minds right now. So we thank you and welcome you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here. I think it's an excellent Facebook group that's very needed. I'm glad you guys put it together, something that we do need to talk about. I'm going to talk to you guys about today is about a little bit about what we need to think about coming in the fall and what we might want to consider, some things we want to consider or do to try to increase the impact that we're having on students. And I'll talk more about that as we get going. And some of this stuff, a lot of what I'm going to talk about could apply to any subject because that's the foundational part. There's actually a book called Visible Learning for Literacy. And some of the pieces I'm talking about are the foundational pieces in the chapter 1. So these are just going to give you some things that can help you across the board when you go back. And I know there's a few people on here, there's not a ton, but I try to get the chat moving and have some discussion. So I'm going to have some things going on just so we can get to know each other and I get to know the people on here. Although I think I know a lot of the people on here. You did get to learn a lot about me. I have apparently a way too long bio. I need to slow down on that a little bit. Some things that weren't included on there, maybe even that's specific to reading. I was on the Kansas Legislative Task Force for Dyslexia. I was part of the KSDE committee that talked about how to implement those changes. I also have the father of a son who likely has dyslexia, and I received excellent support for that, my child, when he was in school in Wichita at younger years. So he's done great, which is something I was able to present at the Capitol building in Topeka. Also, other pieces going on is I'm a certified visible learning and PLC Plus consultant, but this presentation isn't about all of that. It's going to be tied to it, but it's not through the company that does that. So I'm not using their slides. I'm not using their materials. That stuff's all better, but it's going to be related to that because that's what a lot of things that I think we need to do are related to. So I want to get to know you guys just a little bit. So if you're here in the chat, just kind of tell me about yourself a little bit. What organization do you currently work for? So I just want to know who's in the house today. All right, got some of my USD 259 friends. They haven't heard me talk enough yet, or they wanted to be here to make sure I didn't mess up. Okay, good, thanks. And speaking of messing up, I do want to be clear, this is like hour 12 of working for me today. I had work for 10 hours, then I had my doctorate class, and I'm going straight into this. So I want to play a game with you. If I say something wrong, or I get tongue-tied, or say something crazy, you need to put LOL in the chat. And whoever has the most LOLs at the end of this time, I'm going to count them, you get 10 gold stars. Because the odds of me having a tongue twister after 12 hours in a row is high. So next up, getting to know you just a little bit more. I want to know your current position and level. Some of you put that in there. So if you didn't already put it in there, throw it in there. And welcome Heidi from Newton. I saw you just jump on there. Some other folks I've worked with before. Got some coaches, principal, state trainer. All right, one more question for you. We're gonna skip one, but we're gonna do this one. I wanna know as an educator, what's your superpower? What do you feel that you bring to the table that goes above and beyond everything else? What's your biggest strength? You all have one. You all probably have 12. Just tell me what you think your largest is. Building relationships, helping struggling students, putting yourself in the student's place, communication and passion, being student-centered, learning. Those are amazing superpowers to have, amazing things to have in your possession to work with students and helping them realize their potential is another one that just popped in there. That's exactly right. And some of what we're going to talk today is about how we can maximize some of those pieces. And using the same strategies, we could take some of the pieces that maybe were not our superpowers and increase them too. So first, I want to point you towards a resource page / handout. I'm going to put that in the chat. For those of you on the recording, I've got a tiny URL up there. It's SOR July, and that was taken for some reason. So I put HP Heath Peine on that. So Science of Reading July, HP is your tiny URL. That way you can go to the doc. There are a lot of resources on there. Today's a short period of time. We can't save the world in an hour, but we can learn things that interest us and spark our passion that we can go back to later and learn more. That can help us save the world. So you've got a lot of resources there you can consider, including my contact information, where if you don't get your 10 gold stars for the LOLs of my mistakes, you can request them there. You can also request other information from me, questions, emails, anytime you want. Feel free to contact me and let me know. So here's going to be the outline for the day, for the hour, not the day. The outline for the hour is we're going to talk a little bit about accelerating learning, building efficacy, and then strategies for impact. And the strategies for impact, I'm going to tell you that's going to be a speed round because we have an hour and we're just going to hit 3 of them real quick. So anything you like, you can go to those resources and get more out of it. But we're going to start out with that accelerating learning. And what I want you to think about first, if we were live, I would ask you to do a fist to 5. But how often, just put in the chat, 1 if never, 5 if all the time, do you think about your impact on students? Not their current achievement, but the impact you're having, the growth you're creating. And this is a recording, so nobody will see what you have. So this is private up here. Won't call out any names. We'll see we got it. I see a lot of 5s. That's because we've got high achievers. High achievers are on webinars that are optional at 7 o'clock at night. Yes, good, excellent. So what we can do is, because everybody who watches the recording is going to have a 5 too, show this to your friends, right? Talk to them about it. Talk to your friends that are a 1 or a 2. Talk to your friends that are constantly focused on points, that are focused on percentage of correct answers and not learning, focused on just achievement and not growth. Those are the people you want to share it with. I've been teaching a graduate education class on instruction for about 5 years. And trust me, there's still a lot of them out there. Every semester I get, why didn't I think of this before? And it's not their fault. They just have been taught that way. But impact outside of education, I'd never heard it talked about so much in my life until the pandemic started, right? Then every single night, the White House has a briefing on the impact of social distancing. I stole this graphic from them. Is what is our impact? What's the impact of doing this? That's because they were looking at things through science and through medical terms. And not often enough in education do we focus on that impact. And I believe coming into the fall, getting back to our hopefully new normal, that impact is what we need to focus on. There are a lot of information in the news that wants us to focus on learning loss. There are people that want us to focus on recovery. How do we recover? Learning loss. Oh, woe is me. And I'm not sure that's where we need to go. I never felt that's where we need to go. And there have been some great books published and webinars lately that explain it very, very well, that they don't agree either. That's not where we need to go. What we need to focus on is that impact that we're having. And we need to try to accelerate that impact, which is what we're going to talk about today. So our learning intention today, because we've got an hour session, which is kind of short, is I want you to understand what it means to accelerate learning, and then where you can get more, a few ways to do it, and then where you get more information. That's our learning intention. Our success criteria is that I want you to be able to describe what accelerated learning means, because we're not talking about a program anybody buys. It's not what we're talking about. I want you to be able to find resources that can help you learn more. And I want to discuss 3 practices that have the potential to accelerate learning and how to do them, and some tools you can use. Okay. So I found out that when I present with Google, it goofs up every single time. I don't know why. It's kind of fun though. But, and I keep using it because it's so darn easy. So I'm going to reshare my screen, and really it didn't want to show it, but I need to put the sound on too. That was my fault. So I'm going to play a video. And in this video, there's going to be a gentleman who's laying down. I want you to put yourself in his shoes. So I think it was somebody, maybe it was Susan, said you're good at putting yourself in a student's shoes. Put yourself in this gentleman's shoes. Tell me what you'd be thinking at this time as you watch the video. Okay, there we go.
Have you ever worked with Dr. Francis? Oh yeah, he's okay.
Just okay?
Guess who just got reinstated? Well, not officially. Nervous?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. I'll see you in there.
Just okay is not okay. It's
All right, so you put yourself in his shoes. Go ahead and put in the chat what you're thinking. What are you thinking if you're that gentleman who's laying down and that doctor comes in? How do you feel about that? Get me out of here. We need out of here fast. Not confident. Not going for it, right? You're not just jumping into that surgery. But I want to ask you, how do you know that's not your doctor?
Have you ever worked with Dr.
That's what it always does in Google. It gives me extra videos. I don't know why. Here's a slide that's supposed to be there. So in research, in medical research, they've shown that it takes an average of 17 years for an evidence-based practice to be put in place. And then even then, it's only implemented less than 50% of the time. So one of the studies was a blood pressure medicine. They studied it, said this is the blood pressure medicine we need to be using. It is great, it works. 17 years later, half the people are using it. And in medicine, we've got very good research because we can bring in and do randomized controlled trials and do all this stuff with research. And we know what's really good. And that information is widely available, and yet it doesn't get implemented very quickly. And I worry that we have the worst problem in education, that there are a lot of things out there that work really, really well, that are fantastic. And you guys know this on the science of reading, and it's not getting used. Because the science of reading, how often have you seen it not getting used? How often have you seen people who've never heard of it? And they should have. And that's many years ago. So I worry about those for education. But there is a body of research that I think gives us that information. And it's the visible learning research from Professor John Hattie. And the numbers are getting off. I should have changed some of those. He has a website that is on your resource guide under the accelerated learning called the Visible Learning Meta X. It's going to be updated in the next week or two. So these numbers will even change. But what he's done is looked at, in the past, it was 1,600 plus meta-analysis, which are studies of studies. And up to, that one says 95. Last I heard it was 96. I really can't keep up. 96,000 different studies. These aren't his studies. Other people are doing studies, and he's putting them together. He takes the data, uses normal statistics called effect size, and figures out pre and post test growth. And right now that says 250 effects. He's up to 310 on the new data. I know that 310 effects looking at over 300 million students. The average growth is 0.4, which Professor Hattie says equates to about a year's worth of growth. But that's the average amount of growth. So we can look at this research and figure out a little more about what works. And I'll get into that more in just a second, but I want to just show you that when this came out, the Times Educational Supplement said it's the holy grail of education. And I've heard Professor Hattie say that maybe we need to quit worrying so much about what works and start worrying about what works best. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. Here's a graph of all those. I think this is when he had 275 effects. It's a little bit older from a video that's referenced on there. And in all of this research, you see the stuff that's red, that's the stuff that doesn't work. Everything else works. 95 to 97% of everything we do in education works. So this is why some reading strategies that you guys have probably advocated against get used because they work. But the question is, how well do they work? Because everything works. If your principal, your superintendent, Joe Biden, Department of Ed, anybody says, try this, it's going to work, they're probably right. It's going to work. But we need to focus on the things that work best. And we need to focus on accelerated learning. So this is the barometer of influences. You see right in the middle, there's that 0.4. Anything that's in the blue, the zone of desired effects, is what I'm going to say accelerates learning. It's above average. And we need to know two things about that. One, we need to know what practices have the potential to be above average. Because when you see an effect size, and you'll see some in a minute, that represents an average of all the research. It's saying of all this research, here's where their average effect was. So some people did better and some people did worse. We also want to know where we are. That's what I mean by measuring that impact. Where is your impact in your classroom? And if it's in the blue, that's good. That's where we need to be. And instead of focusing on learning loss, we need to focus on how we can get our students to make more than that 0.4 growth. Here's another graphic to look at from that same webinar. And this puts it in a quadrant. You've got the horizontal line, which represents the 0.4 growth. So anything to the left of the horizontal line is less than average growth. Anything to the right is more. Then, I'm sorry, that's your vertical line. Your vertical line, anything to the left of vertical line, to the right of the vertical line, that's where you do your growth. Going up and down is achievement. So at the bottom is low achievement, at the top is high achievement. And when you put them into quadrants, this is something we really need to focus on, as to look at where we'd be as a district, as a school, as a classroom, as a student. Where is your growth? Because what happens where that oval's at, when we're over there, we're excited. But if you have low achieving students that made a huge amount of growth, not enough people are excited about that. Not near enough people are excited that this student came in and had low achievement and made a huge amount of growth, and not many people are excited. I'll show you some data from a previous district of mine in a minute. That's amazing. But not everybody was excited because we didn't automatically jump up to that top half. The other problem is in that quadrant that's on the top left, the cruising schools. Students that come that are high achieving, they need to have growth too. So let me just show you a district example. I'm going to go through this couple slides very quickly to make a point. But I'm going to talk about a district that was failing. Okay, it was failing. As many as 75% of the students were below grade level in reading. They struggled. It was not working out, because I don't want you to think, oh, it was a cruising district that was already doing good. There were a lot of struggles in this district. Now here's a chart from a third grade classroom after doing some of the work we're talking about today, after implementing good MTSS and implementing some principles from visible learning. That red line is the 0.4. So you can see in her class, almost every student made more than the 0.4 growth. The average growth was 1.22. Now, effect size in this small sample is less reliable. What we really want to focus on is who's achieving and who's not. And you see there's a couple kiddos that have less than 0.4. And we need to figure out what's going on with them. But it gives you some of that overall data. Here's some other data that in special education from doing this work. their percentage of students in special ed dropped from 27% to 20%, and the referrals went down to 50% of what they were before. In reading, and when you guys go back, you can pause it and read this close. It's one of those slides that have too much on it, but I wanted to add the data. You can see on there that there was a lot of growth. They had 80% of the students making that average amount of growth. 80% of the students. This is a district with 4 schools. So this is 4 elementary schools of K through 1 kids. 80% were making at least average growth. Of their special education students, students with an identified disability, 38% in one building and 48% in the other were making growth at or above the 80th percentile. That's accelerated learning. This is reading, accelerated reading learning. If you want to look at that in an effect size, this is the effect size data for that class. The top one shows you by grade. The bottom one shows you by tier for tiered intervention. So while not every student was successful, as a 4-building group, this was amazing. You can see that everybody made above the 0.4. Second grade and third grade almost doubled the 0.4, or did double it. When you look at the tiered intervention, they almost, tier 3 about tripled it. That's what I mean by accelerating learning and focusing on impact, looking at those things. So we're going to go through and do a little quiz to see what you know about research. Okay. So, and I know there's not a ton of people on here. I was going to do 2, but I'm only going to really do 1 this time. But what I want you to do is just put a fist of 5 in the chat of how confident you are about knowing what works in education. Put a 5 if you think, hey, I'm amazing. Put a 1 if you're like, I'm not confident. Just kind of want to see where you're at. Make sure you're still awake. 3s, 4s, 4s, 3s. Good. 3.5. I like that. We've got to get the half in there. That's easier when I type than we do actual fist of 5, isn't it? All right. So in your handout, in your resource, you've got these listed. I want you to write them in your resource guide from biggest effect size to smallest. And to use that resource guide, you've got to make your own copy, or you can write on a piece of paper, whatever works. I'll just give you 2 minutes to do this. All right. I'm going to assume you're mostly done. You might be still going through it, but I'm going to show you the results. And when you see the results, just make a clapping hand with your emojis and zoom in the bottom if you feel like you rocked it, and make a heart if you feel like you didn't because you'd love to know more. Okay? So I'm going to go to the results. There we go. Nope, still on. Hold on. There we go. So while you're looking at those and while you're thinking about whether you want to clap and give yourself a pat in the back or give yourself a heart because you'd love to know more, we could talk a lot about all of these, but in the short amount of time we have, we're not going to get into it. But I really want you to see, collective teacher efficacy. That's the highest thing we can work for. It has an effect size. I think in the new numbers, it's going to be 1.39. It might be, I think that's where it's at. It might have moved up a little. Response to intervention also has a very high effect size, which is something that we use in reading a lot in Kansas. Classroom discussion and cooperative learning. That's where some people are like, well, I don't get it. Why is cooperative learning is actually about at the average and classroom discussions double the average? That's just because we're in cooperative learning groups doesn't mean we're also having good discussion. There's a big difference between sitting in collaborative groups or even working in collaborative groups and having good classroom discussion. You'll notice problem-based learning is not very high. It depends on where you are in your learning. It is the average effect is a 0.35. If you are at the surface level, it has closer to I believe it's a 0.15, and then it goes up much higher if you're working on the deep level of learning. Learning styles is a kind of a myth. It's really not that powerful. We focus a lot on it. One-on-one laptops, distance learning. The good news is they don't take us backwards. When you look at that data, it's not telling us, when you look at those data, that we shouldn't do it. It's just saying we can't count on it to accelerate learning. Everything above that cooperative learning has the potential to accelerate learning. Okay, it just depends on how you do it. You can work on collective teacher efficacy and get nothing. But on average, people get a lot of power when they can achieve it. So we're not going to do another quiz. We're just going to look at another set because I want you to see another difference on here. And that problem-based learning, it's a little bit under the average. Everything above that accelerates learning. And I want you to notice this because there are things that we don't focus on that we should. Also, I've got another graphic that I pulled out and I wish I hadn't, that talks about looking at growth mindset and some of those things has very low effect size too. In the research, the only people that really get it to work are Carol Dweck and her people. And that's because they do it right. And most of us don't do it right. But the point is, why aren't we focusing on student efficacy? Why aren't we focused on not labeling students? Because that has a lot more potential than focusing on a growth mindset. And mindfulness, that's another one that's just not super high. It's good for some kids, but on average, it doesn't make a huge impact. So there are things that really, really can affect and accelerate learning. And what I want to say to you is, I don't know that we need to rescue our kids. I don't know that we want to approach the fall thinking we need to rescue students. I think we need to approach the fall talking about how we're going to accelerate learning. And under this section in your handout, there are some great resources. There's a link to a new book out, Leading the Rebound. It is fantastic. I finished it a week or two ago. I think I had to start switching my colors of highlights. This is the research I want to highlight. This is something I want to use for a quote. This is something I want to remember and get a system going. It was that good. There's also one on there, and it might be down lower, that involves tutoring that I think is also fantastic. Some of the same authors are in there, some of the same information. But if you're working with small groups or individuals, that's a book that I would look into because both of them talk about how to accelerate learning. Both of them talk about how to move faster. So that's what we're going to do. Coming into the presentation, we're going to start moving faster and talk about how you can do that in your classroom too, in ways that are kind of foundational and can be used in others. If you're watching this video, I would suggest that you pause it and look at this question, maybe talk to other people about it, because what I want you to think about is, why is knowing your impact important? How are you doing it now? And then what can you start, stop, and continue in the future to help understand your impact better and to accelerate learning? At the bottom of the handout, there's a start, stop, and continue box that you can fill out and use on your own to get some of that information, to collect your learning as you go through. I know most people are going to watch us on a video. So now we're going to move into building student efficacy. That's the second one on here because it has a lot of power and it has, we'll talk about the effect size, but also in some of those books I mentioned, like Leading the Rebound, I think they make an excellent point that many of our students that weren't as successful during our pandemic teaching period may not be connected to learning anymore. And we need to reconnect them to learning, reconnect them to school, make them feel like they have a lot of efficacy. And we'll talk more in just a moment. I just want you to think for a moment. We're not going to put in the chat, but think about what the hopes and dreams you have for your students are. If you think of next year, from the end of the year, I hope and dream that my students can. What would you put in that box if you were filling that sentence out? And when I've done this with teachers, I've asked this question a few times. We have pretty high hopes and dreams, right? We want great things for our kids. We want them to excel. We want them to succeed. And we have high hopes and dreams. And this is, again, where I think coming in with the opposite, saying, ooh, things were bad. COVID was bad. Life is bad. We need to back up and try to rebuild you. That's not going to build their efficacy. And building student efficacy has an effect size of 0.71. So that's getting close to the double amount. It was the definition from the website that you have in the link from Visible Learning MetaX says this was first theorized in educational theory by Albert Bandura. Self-efficacy refers to a sense of confidence or the set of self-perceptions that influence thought, actions, and emotional arousal by enabling people to make decisions about what course of action they intend to pursue. So overall, it's their confidence. It's their belief that they can and will be successful. Instead of maybe focusing on growth mindset, which is kind of related, or focusing on mindfulness, or learning styles, or homework, or problem-based learning, if you had to choose between all of those and building self-efficacy, I'm going to suggest you try to accelerate learning and choose building self-efficacy. Let's talk about a little bit about how we can do that. Here is a quote from Albert Bandura from 1977. I'll give you a moment just to read that. So efficacy, your students have it. They have a level. Everybody's on a continuum. You have a high amount of efficacy, you have a low amount of efficacy. You're somewhere on that continuum. And it's context specific. You know, some of us educators might have had a high amount of efficacy going into the pandemic, and then we got doing some online learning, and all of a sudden our efficacy for online learning may have been low, or vice versa. Your students are the same way. They might feel more efficacy in math than they do reading, or vice versa. Our goal is to try to make them feel efficacious in what they're doing in our classroom and build their confidence up so they feel like they can take on any challenge, which, like I said, is a little like growth mindset, but it's more, and we have specific ways that we can do that. According to Albert Bandura, self-efficacy comes from 4 sources. And this has been done through research many, many times by different people. And when you go through and look, you see the terms change a little bit. So the 4 sources, just the way I'm going to word it here, are mastery experiences, which we're going to talk about more, social modeling, so they see others having that success. They see some of that success happening going on around them. Verbal persuasion, people talking to them about their success, discussing their success. And then you have physical and emotional states. And that's kind of like being happy, right? When you start feeling good, you feel confident, that starts to help build your efficacy as well. We're going to talk for the one we're going to look at are mastery experiences, because this is one, it's the biggest source. 2, it's the one that I think we can affect most in some of the reading instruction that I've seen out there. Something we can start with anyway. Because a lot of times, if you're doing intervention or you're doing small group instruction, we're actually really good at some of this. We're tracking progress. We're seeing what they know. We're telling kids what they need to know and what they need to do next. But we've got to go in there with the mindset to help them celebrate that growth. I was in a presentation recently with Doug Fisher, and he was showing a video of a young lady and a teacher having they'd had a conversation. I think the student had said something to the teacher to the effect of, like, she didn't feel very efficacious. She said, well, you taught me to read. And then the teacher had a conversation with her about all the hard work that she did to learn to read, that the student did, all the successes she had along the way. And it really helped flip that student's mindset to see, hey, it isn't the teacher doing the work. I was doing the work. Helping them see that while you're giving them instruction is very important. It helps build that efficacy that they can see that they're the ones doing it. So when you're teaching reading, how do you give them that experience? What opportunities do you give them to ensure that they see their success as they master concepts and skills and they celebrate those successes? The next thing I want to talk to you about, putting this graph back up here, is MTSS or RTI. We'll get a little bit more into that in a minute, but often those processes are looking to find kids who didn't make a lot of progress. They're targeting students who struggle. And I understand that, that's okay, but we've got to be careful how we approach that. One thing we need to consider when we find students that struggle, before we just automatically put them in a special group, we need to think about equity audits and removing barriers. What is it that's preventing that student from learning? What can we do to help that student not need the group, right? We can't just assume, oh, you're a tier 2 kid. Hate when I hear that. You're a student in tier 2 and the goal is to get you out. But the thing is, do they really need to go in? Can we prevent it? Look for those barriers. An equity audit is, and there's a lot of examples out there, but I'll tell you where to find one in just a moment. An equity audit is where we look at our class or our building and we try to see who it's working, who our instruction is working for and who it is not. And we look for trends. You know, if this isn't working for a certain demographic of students, why? Or a certain group of students, why? What can we do to try to overcome that barrier? One of the first places I heard about equity audits are from the PLC Plus books and their PLC Plus process. They have 5 main questions. And the first one is, where are we going? Which refers to our goals. Where are we now? That's our current progress. How do we move learning forward? What did we learn today? And the last one is, who benefited and who did not? So that's like that graph that we looked at, like this. Who benefited and who did not? So we don't just keep moving. What did we learn? You've got some people that have really high growth in this classroom and some that don't. What can we learn from that? We need to think about grouping. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my son here. I've got a son and he gets a lot of stories told about him. One, he has ADHD. And when he started out in preschool, he got kicked out of multiple preschools during his, I say 9, my wife says I'm exaggerating. I'm not sure, I am exaggerating. It was like 2 weeks and then we get the call, you can't come back in preschool. And these were private preschools. And we finally got him, actually it was in Wichita Public Schools, into a school, and things went well for him. He's actually he's in a gifted program now. Now he's in middle school, he's in a gifted program, but there was a story one of his teachers told us that really, really got to me and it still sticks with me now. This was one of the best teachers I've seen. I've observed teachers across multiple districts, probably 80 buildings. I've seen a lot of teachers. One of the best was his classroom teacher. And his classroom teacher said that one day he's working with Gideon one-on-one and Gideon's bawling. He's crying. And he's like, what's wrong? And he said, I must not understand this because you only work with the kids that don't get it. He realized it. He realized that when they broke up into groups, the teacher only worked with the kids that don't get it. I bet those kids realized it too. While we do break up into some groups, we've got to be careful. We've got to have not always say this person's here, and we need to try to have some mixed groups too. Not just skill-based like we tend to do in MTSS or RTI. Try to mix those up. I like also when people call it win time, what I need time. And for those Wichita friends that are on here, you'll hear more about that from Dr. Leanne Young at our special education summit coming up in a couple of weeks. But that way every kid's going to a group, they know what they need, but have those short times. Other times, go to flexible groups. And in the Rebound book, they have a strategy that I like too, where they just divide the class in half and make a list A and B, and then they take the top 4 off that list and put them together, and then the next 4 and put them together. That way you've got some kids that struggle. You don't have the highest kid with the lowest kid, and you have a good mix. And it's a real easy mix to make. So moving forward, as you go back, pause the video and reflect on this, just like the other one, I want you to think about why efficacy is important. I want you to think about how you're building efficacy now. And no matter where you're at, because somebody's like, I'm great at this, I'm good. I want you to think what you can either stop or start to make yourself even better, because our kids are going to need it, right? We need to accelerate learning, and no matter where you're at, we can always improve. Okay, last one, we're going into additional strategies. And this one, because I knew how time was going to go, I'm calling it the speed round. I'm going to pick up the pace. But you have videos, books, articles that you can refer to, and my email. You can email anytime. We can get on a video chat. We can talk. There's a lot of things that we can do. There are people who I still email that were in my college classes like 3 or 4 years ago. And every now and then, I don't know if I'm driving them crazy or not, but I get an email from one's like, I graduated 3 years ago, but I'm glad you still email. So yeah, I'm willing to keep talking about things. All right, 3 strategies we're going to look at are teacher clarity, feedback, and RTI MTSS. And we're just looking at some of the basics here, but we're going to show a video again, real quick video. And I want you to think on this video. I reshared a minute ago, and I don't know if I hit the fun sound button. Okay. As you watch this video, I want you to know it's not you. Nobody watching this video is this person, but it's somebody you know. I just want you to think about that. Somebody in your building might be this person.
There goes your weekend, eh, Markin?
Not really. Let me explain how this works. If these were regular tests, what I would do is I would find the smartest students, Maya, and I would mark hers first.
Right.
Then I'd use that as my answer key. But these are essay questions. Now, if I were to read these, it would take forever. So I don't. So I look at their mark going into it. Okay, like Maya, where's Maya? Has the highest mark in the class. There she is. So that's my answer key.
Don't you already know the answers?
Sometimes theirs are better. I gotta give her a good mark, a couple circles, and then sometimes too vague.
Right.
That way I don't have to give her 100.
Yeah,
They only look
keep
at
it
the
realistic.
mark. 96. I give her a little more than she has going in. That way she won't come back.
Right.
Challenge me. Okay?
That's a good
Come on.
system.
Jimmy, look at Jimmy. Nothing.
Right, it's never nothing.
Garbage. Waste of time. 33, there's some words there, but I have no time to read them. So then I get angry. Jimmy, ridiculous. This
Right.
has got to stop.
He could say the same thing to you.
Okay, you got the system?
Yeah, it's a good system, buddy.
You do those ones.
You want me to mark them?
You don't really mark, you just
All right.
put marks on it, and you put a circle, you circle a
That seems
number.
good. I'm a forger.
Okay, here's Mike. Now, Mike, he's got a 62.
You should give him an 80.
Give
That'll
him an
make
80.
his day.
Make his day.
Right.
Okay. And he goes home, his parents are excited. I like that. Finally.
Like you've been rooting for him the whole
Yeah,
time.
about
Right.
time. Thank
That's
you.
good.
This person, Shauna, I don't like her. Drives me nuts.
Right.
So what I do is I fail her on the exam, but I just give her enough to pass the course, so I don't have to teach her again. So it's like a lot of check marks, some question marks, underline some things, couple good comments.
Mediocre.
I haven't used that one. That's a good one. Happy face, smile.
That's disturbing.
You are almost a teacher.
All right, so again, that was none of you. Nobody who would ever take the time to be here with us tonight would do that. Neither would anybody who watches the video. That's not you. But unfortunately, it might happen. And it might not happen quite like that. But what does happen is that we have a class that's not about learning. That teacher has no idea what the kids are learning, right? This isn't even about points. He's just making up the points as he goes. It's about compliance. You know, is this a good kid? All right, good grade. Not a kid I don't think's a good kid because that's how I think. Not a good grade. That's not where we need to be. We need to have clarity around what our students are learning.
There goes your weekend.
And clarity has an updated effect size of 0.84. It was a little lower than that, but as the research has come in, it's went up. And that's in over 96,000 plus studies across visible learning. The average is 0.4. Remember that? Teacher clarity is 0.84. So it has a lot of power. And it's something that's really, really easy to do. Not only is it easy to do, it is foundational to several other high effects. So that green line is average. Everything above it accelerates learning. And where you see the red arrows on the right, that's telling us that you need clarity to have a really good effect there. So let's talk about what teacher clarity is. And again, this is the speed rounds. Why I only do that because I know we're recording it and you can go back and look. And you've got lots of resources in your handout, including videos, articles, and books. So what is clarity? This research comes from Findick from 1990, and we sometimes focus on learning intentions and success criteria, but we're really looking at more. We're looking at clarity of organization, explanation, examples and guided practice, assessment of student learning. All of those things are the pieces that we're looking at for clarity. But I think it really starts with good learning intentions and success criteria. Now, in your district, you may call it an objective, you may call it all kinds of things, but a learning intentions focused on what the students are learning that day, not what they're doing. That's where I see a problem. When I rolled out this work in one of my districts, we started with all good intentions, and we started writing what we're doing, not what we're learning. And it's not just throwing up the standard. I've quizzed administrators on standards and said, what does this standard mean? And they don't all come up with the same answer. Some standards are more straightforward than others, but it's about what you're learning. It's written in kid-friendly language, but you got to keep the academic language. If it's language they need to know in life, if it's language that's at that age, if it's language going to be on the test, you need to keep it. And if they don't know it, you have to teach it. Here's some examples. I pulled these examples out of the Teacher Clarity Playbook, which is a great resource. There is a link on the page too where you can look at that book, and there's a video based on it. What I really like about these is it starts out with I am learning. And where I've seen some educators struggle getting from learning to doing, they're like, well, how do I write this as a learning intention? And they put something up, and really all they needed to do was write I am learning in front of it. When you say that to a student, you're indicating to them that your job today isn't to finish this worksheet and get points. Your job today isn't just to sit here with me in my reading group, repeat the words I say, follow my instructions. Your job is to learn this. And that's where we want to go with it. And it's not about just putting it on a wall. It's about the kids knowing it. It's also good that they know why they're learning it for relevance. So what am I learning today? Why am I learning it? And finally, the success criteria is how will I know when I've learned it? So these are specifics that tell the students I've met that learning intention. Success criteria are things that we want to assess for. So when we give an assessment, we base the learning intention and success criteria on the standard. The learning intention is what they're learning. The success criteria is how we know they've learned it. And we design our assessments to assess how they've learned it. That way, the students know what we're assessing, we know what we're assessing, and it all aligns. And these aren't things that you can just put on a board. Like I said, there are ways you've got to teach it to students. And you could teach it through many ways. Choral responses, connecting to prior knowledge can be very, very powerful. They could do a self-assessment. What do I already know? What do I not know? They can rank order them. Which ones are more challenging for me? But when you go up to your student, you should be able to say, what are you learning today? And they can tell you. And it's not I'm reading necessarily. It could be I'm learning this vowel sound. It could be I'm learning about comprehension. I'm learning to find the author's purpose. There's a lot of things that it could be, but it's not what they're doing. And then when you say, how will you know you've learned it? They should be able to articulate that to you. So that was a fast teacher clarity. Next, we're going to look at a fast feedback. Got 9 minutes left. So feedback has a very high effect size too, but not as high as some of the ones I'm talking to you about. And there's a reason I'm still showing it to you. Remember, it's an average. So in the updated information that's coming out, feedback's at 0.62. And that means when some people do it, they get higher. Some people get lower. 0.62 is the average. I'm going to skip through this one just for the sake of time. And if you're really thinking, well, we want to accelerate learning, he's showing us things that are above 1.0, why this one? Here's why it's important. According to some of the research and like from Graham Nuthall, 80% of the feedback students receive are from other students. And 80% of that feedback is wrong. 1/3 of all feedback is negative. So if the average is 0.62 or wherever it was, and it's higher, that much higher than the overall average, and a third of it's negative, that means it has a huge variance. So you've got to know how to get good feedback to use it to accelerate learning. You've got to know how to get good feedback to have it accelerate learning. So let's talk about how we can do that. Here are 3 questions from Hattie and Temperley. And this is a place to get you started. In the resource guide, there's an article and it talks about a matrix of feedback that has some great examples on it that you can go back and use. And they use the same language that you're seeing here. But feedback should answer 3 questions, one of 3 questions. Where am I going? So this is, what is my goal, right? So if we're learning a new reading skill, learning new letters, some of that, what students should know what their goal is. Next, how am I doing? So where am I right now in my progress to meet the goal? And lastly, where to next? What do I need to do next to get closer to reaching my goal? So those 3 questions are what our feedback needs to be based on. Comments like praise are to self, good job, all of those, they don't have a huge impact. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do them to build relationships. We shouldn't love our students and we shouldn't care, but we shouldn't count on them to accelerate learning. It's best to give them next step feedback. Feedback that helps them understand how to close the gap between where they are and where they need to be. And when you can normalize that in your classroom and make that part of your formative assessment and your students' self-assessment and your peers' assessment, where they understand the goals and they understand how to assess and talk next steps, it's not a painful thing. It's normal. Here's where you are, here's where you need to be, here's what you're doing next. I mean, I do it with adults that I teach all the time. And the first week or so, they're kind of like, yeah, about it, because I'm having to give feedback to each other, right? A couple weeks in, they're fine, because they're like, this is what we do. We're just telling each other how to get better. So another thing to remember is feedback is only effective when it's received and when it's acted upon. And just writing comments on a paper is not that effective. And that's something that I'm sure all of you guys do a good job with, is giving more immediate verbal feedback with the reading. I'm gonna skip that. Another thing to think about, feedback that's the most powerful is what I'm calling upstream feedback from the student to the teacher. Feedback from the student to the teacher is the most powerful because that tells the teacher about their next instructional steps. Feedback that says, here's where my student needs to be, here's where they are, and here's what I need to do next. That's where you get the most power. Last, we're going to look quickly at RTI MTSS because I know this is something we do and I don't want to lose any focus on it because you need to know the power of it. You see where it's at on that scale? It's way down there. It can be hugely powerful, but there are some hangups with it too. Something we want to make sure that we don't do when we're doing RTI MTSS is that barrier piece, destroying the efficacy. We only want to give it to students that need it. We don't want to assume special education students need it. We don't want to assume it's a life sentence. We don't want to assume it's Hotel California. Once you go in, you're never getting out. You've got to get kids out. That's the goal. Get them out of tier 3 to tier 2, out of tier 2 into 1. That happens by accelerating learning, but RTI is actually in Hattie's meta-analysis in the categories listed under feedback, because the big piece of it is about understanding just like those questions we talked about. And those of you that have taught reading interventions, you do those types of questions with your students all the time. RTI is very much like MTSS. The graphic on the left used to be from the RTI, what does it say there, For Success website. It's now MTSS For Success website. They've actually changed the name of it because it's getting to be synonymous. Professor Hattie has something he calls the DIE cycle. It's very, very similar in my mind, where you diagnose where somebody is, you decide what intervention they need, you implement it, and you evaluate it. You keep going through these cycles. There is a book on that that's linked to, that's very fantastic, and it's linked into this section. So all of these 3 things, do you see a similarity there? What do you see? Circles, right? You see circles. I hear people talk about the MTSS triangle anytime. I want them to quit. I want them to quit talking about the triangle because I don't care about the triangle. Tiering kids isn't what works. It's going in a cycle. Learning in a cycle, whether you're at the student level, classroom level, building level, district level, state level is way more important than tiering people. We want to keep looking at what we're doing and work to improve what we're doing constantly. That's the part of RTI that has that high effect, but we can do that in our classroom, whether we're doing RTI or MTSS or not. So I've got a few closing thoughts. Just as we're closing, things that I would recommend is when you go back into the fall, don't rush into the bright, shiny things. Everybody's selling a product right now because there's ESSER money, right? They were all selling products before, but now they're selling them and they push hard. Try this new computerized reading program. You don't even need to teach your kid to read. Put them on this computer. They'll take care of it. Yeah, that's tough. Not sure that one's going to work out. Don't assume every kid has the same needs. Even during the pandemic times, there were a lot of students that did better. And there were students who learned that maybe didn't progress as much in their academics, but they learned a lot of new skills that are very beneficial to them. And they have a lot of strengths with self-regulation, self-assessment, some of those things. Don't just assume you can intervene your way out of a bad core. You've got to have a good core and good interventions to help catch people up. Both of them can help. Don't do it in isolation and don't go back to the same way it was before. We've got an opportunity now to create change. Instead of that bright and shiny, we need to work on building some expertise. Up in the accelerated, there's a white paper that I think is fantastic. It's a short white paper that talks about recommendations of what we do next. I'd really check that out, and the Rebound book. Those are two things I would really, really look into, is that white paper and the Rebound book. But we need to continually look at our impact. We need to try to build that student efficacy, focus on the core, do equity audits, and a lot of those things going through. And I know if you look at that visible learning for literacy book, you'll see a lot of great, very literacy specific things, but you've got to have the foundations first, right? Before you focus on, at the surface level, summarizing gives you this. That's good, but we need to have clarity and good feedback and build efficacy first. That's why I went that route, because I think that's where we need to start with accelerating learning. Then we can add on to that. At the very bottom of your list, there are some other links I always want to tell you about. During the school year, most Monday afternoons, or for us in Central Time, it's more evening, there are free webinars on Corwin. There's an archive there of years of webinars that you can go back. Corwin also has a blog site, a lot of excellent articles. And again, this is not a Corwin presentation, but it's my favorite resource, so I'm telling you about it. They have institutes. Institutes are virtual. A lot of them cost like $200, and you get a full day, sometimes 2 days worth of good learning. I highly recommend those. The annual Visible Learning Conference is going to be virtual again this year. There's a link there. It's coming up in a couple weeks. I'm presenting there. I'll go deeper into MTSS and RTI and how to get power out of that. And there's a lot of fantastic people there. If you did want to bring anybody into your district or talk about bringing somebody in your district, I would recommend contacting Kelly Valentine Schultz, and her email address is on the screen. I've worked with her out of 3 different organizations for about 5 or 6 years. Never let me down, has great information. As I mentioned before, you are free to contact me anytime you want, Twitter, email, any type of way. I'll be there to help you and answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you so much. I think this information was just so powerful, and I'm excited that you provided us a guide and resources that we can go back to. I'm going to share this widely, I think, because I think this would be something for, districts, administrators, teachers to really think about and look at as they start the new school year. I think this is going to be forefront. So we appreciate you providing that as well. And your time and knowledge, because sounds like you've had quite a long day. So we appreciate you taking the extra time with us to share this information with us too. So yeah, I think it's invaluable. Thank you.
You bet. I'm glad to do it.